I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. New York Times op-ed columnist Bret Stephens has been stirring controversy since he arrived at the paper last April from the Wall Street Journal. The Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist invites conversation, occasionally heated debate, often surprise with his opinions. He joins us in a moment. Then Itamar Moses, the book writer for the highly acclaimed musical The Band's Visit, nominated for 11 Tonys, describes the transition from film to stage. My Times colleagues join me with informed opinions about this week's events on the backstory, and I'll offer some additional thoughts on CODA. But first, op-ed columnist Bret Stephens. Bret, you're the closest we have of an op-ed columnist who's remotely sympathetic to the Trump administration, and that's not saying much. Does it look like we are piling on too much? Op-ed is supposed to be opposite to the editorial page, and yet there isn't much op-ed opinion when it comes to the Trump administration. How do we account for that?
Well, there's a lot to criticize, and so I think that's mainly what accounts for it. This is not a normal president or a normal administration. This is a president who's gone out of his way to goad and defame the media in a way that I think is almost unprecedented in American history, at least this publicly. I think we pile on when we go after the minutiae and end up becoming outrage machines. You know, John McCain, who's been no slouch when it comes to criticizing the president, did make the point somewhere fairly recently that he can't be the car alarm that just keeps going off. And I do fear that there is a risk that the media does become a car alarm to the point that the public just starts ignoring most of what we say because it sounds like so much noise.
So how do you shut it off, or how do you modulate it, or how do you pick and choose?
Well, I think for starters, the whole world doesn't revolve around Donald Trump, his tweets, his utterances. There's a big wide world out there that we ought to be writing about. And one of the things that I have pledged to myself to do is to occasionally write columns that don't include the word Trump, or at least in which he is a side note. I have in fact written some columns which praise at least some of his policies, at least when I think they deserve praise. My colleagues don't agree, but
that's why you're there.
That's why I'm there. But I'm not here either to be the representative never Trumper or the representative anything. I'm trying to sort of think out loud for intelligent readers who want a different perspective.
What has the administration done right as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think that it was right, for example, to take a hard look at the Iran deal, and you can have an honest argument about whether they should have simply withdrawn or forced a renegotiation within the terms of the deal, but it was very flawed. I think it's done much to repair our alliances, our traditional alliances in the Middle East, which I think had tilted too far toward Iran. I think moving the embassy to Jerusalem was the right thing to do. And listen, I mean, we often ignore the fact that we're at an unemployment rate of 3.9%. The economy is doing reasonably well. I understand a lot of that credit doesn't belong to the administration, but given all of the forecasts that a Trump presidency would lead to a worldwide recession, it must be doing something right, not least on the deregulatory agenda. I think corporate tax reform was the right thing to do. So I can think of many things. My problem really is that I think the moral core of the administration, I should say the moral core of the president, is rotten.
We are a long time, of course, from 2020, and a lot can happen between now and then. But if you had to predict between now and then, does the president retire, get reelected, get indicted, get impeached? What's going to happen to him?
My bet is he's going to be impeached, not convicted, and reelected.
Really?
And, you know, Larry Tribe, the law professor at Harvard, made an important point the other day. He said, if Democrats are going to impeach, that's a place where they're going to have to shoot to kill. So it would be very foolish.
You don't wound the king.
You don't wound the king. It would be very foolish to impeach him in the House. He will certainly not be convicted in the Senate, barring some unbelievable or some revelation out of Bob Mueller's investigation. And he will be able to present himself, as he so often likes to do, as a martyr to an establishment that is just congenitally or temperamentally hostile to him. We learned from the Clinton years that moral outrage only gets you so far in terms of moving votes. What really matters to people are they employed? Is their neighbor employed? Is their son employed? And by the way, how's their 401k doing?
As far as you're concerned, has he done anything that's impeachable?
Well, I don't know. And the point that I've consistently made is we ought to find out what Bob Mueller finds out for himself, which is one of the reasons why I find the calls for Mueller to step down or for Trump to fire him to be, I guess, frankly, disgraceful. I mean, all of this talk that some of Mueller's attorneys are Democrats seems to me a kind of nonsense when the people running the investigation are, first, Bob Mueller, a Republican, and second, Rod Rosenstein, a Republican. And by the way, since when did the quality of a semi-judicial investigation have anything to do with party affiliations of one side or the other? If that's how we start to judge things, we're on the road to I don't know, the politics of Venezuela or some other unfortunate country.
Let me ask you a question that came up when the Times hired you. People said, critics said, how could we hire someone who doesn't believe in climate change? That's not entirely accurate, but what is your position on climate change, global warming, or whatever we want to call it?
Well, I mean, I thought, quite frankly, I was stunned by the level of caricature, misquotation, and
vitriol,
and bad faith in some of the criticism. Look, there are three issues when it comes to climate change, which I think should be distinguished. One is, what's the cause of climate change? I don't think anyone seriously denies climate change, but what's causing it? Is it primarily anthropogenic, man-made, or not? I accept the conclusions of the consensus of scientists that it is a man-made phenomenon, that the world has in fact been warming, something that I made crystal clear in my first column. Second question is, well, what are the consequences? Well, there we're in an area that's somewhat more speculative, right? Because we're forecasting into the future, and the consequences can be somewhere between mild and dire. And then the third issue is, well, then what are the cures? So on the subject of the cause, I think it's very difficult to call me a climate change denier. On the consequences, I don't want to call myself a skeptic per se, because I understand and to a large extent endorse the argument that if there's even a small chance that your house is going to burn down, you take out house insurance. And we need something, a similar policy of climate change insurance, lest the consequences are severe. The third issue, I think, is not a science issue, it's a public policy and a technology discussion, which is, do we have technologies right now that are mature enough to economically deal with the consequences of climate change? You know, 15, 20 years ago, a great many people said, well, what we need is to move to ethanol, to biodiesel fuels. It took us a few years to realize that, in fact, the environmental consequences of, say, farming for biodiesels could exacerbate the very problem we were trying to solve.
Let me ask you a very, very quick question. The Times is always accused of being pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian. You had a column recently pointing out that some of what the Palestinians are suffering, they've brought upon themselves. Would you say we are down the middle or not?
I think the Times, well, this is always a matter of perspective, because it matters where you sit. I think the Times has been, in some of its coverage, I think has not distinguished between cause and effect, victim and perpetrator.
Leaning to which side?
Leaning towards the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll pursue that another time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks to Bret Stephens for joining us. You can read his column on the op-ed page and online at nytimes.com. And when we return, Itamar Moses, the writer of The Band's Visit.
Let me tell you about Petah Tikva. Such a city, everybody loves it. Lots of fun, lots of art, lots of culture. That's Petah Tikva with a P. Where you are, this is not Petah Tikva. Such a city, nobody knows it. Not a fun, not a art, not a culture. This is Petah Tikva with a B.
Like it boring,
Like in barren,
like it bullshit.
like in bland.
Like in basically bleak and beige and blah, blah, blah. Stick a pin in a map of the desert. Build a road to the middle of the desert. Pour cement on the spot in the desert. That's Petah Tikva. Welcome to nowhere. Behold, where there was once only desert, the town of Petah Tikva.
Welcome back. We don't usually introduce a guest with a song, but The Band's Visit is not an ordinary musical. In this era of technological marvels, swooping chandeliers, helicopters, huge casts, this musical defies that kind of convention. It's been nominated for 11 Tony Awards. Joining me is the musical's book writer, Itamar Moses. He and David Yazbek, the composer and lyricist, have created an entirely different theater experience. The Band's Visit playing at the Ethel Barrymore Theater Tuesday through Sunday, and Ben Brantley in the New York Times said it's one of the most ravishing musicals you will ever be seduced by. This play adapted from a movie of the same name. Itamar, what is the difference in seeing the movie on the screen and then adapting it to live theater?
The two forms have a lot in common, which is why the adaptation is possible at all. They're both dramatic storytelling forms, you know, in the form of a script. But movies have at their disposal a lot of other tools, visual storytelling tools, close-ups being the obvious one, just like visual metaphors, images. So the movie is full of not just close-ups of people's, you know, melancholy faces, but these long shots of the desert, of bleak streets. So in adapting it to the stage is a question of how you translate those tools and translate those metaphors and create the same effect in a different way when you can't direct the audience's attention the way you can with a camera lens.
And when, for the uninitiated, when we say someone has written the book for a musical, what does that mean?
It's a really good question because I think it's a often misunderstood term. I mean, in the most obvious sense, and this is, I think, what people think it means, it's everything in the musical that isn't sung. So it is the dialogue, the spoken text, but it's actually something a little bit more abstract than that, where it's the structure, the deep structure of the piece. You're sort of responsible for the event, the sort of chain of dominoes that are the events, and then this dialogue is a surface manifestation of that. But what you're doing as the book writer is making sure the thing's on a sturdy foundation.
How do you and David Yazbek decide what is spoken and what is sung?
You know, every collaboration is a little bit different. In the case of this show, actually, I wrote an initial draft that was just spoken through. I wrote it as though it were a play with no songs, and then he and I sat down with that script and went through it page by page together, sort of circling the moments we thought would be song moments. And then he, you know, it's his fourth musical, so his instincts are pretty honed by now. So he would say, oh yeah, that seems right, and I don't know about this one. And some of the, you know, guesses we made that first pass through turned out to be songs in the show, and some didn't, and we added more later. But that was the process, sort of building up from the chassis of the script.
When you write for the movies, there it is on the screen, it's done. But in the theater, obviously, you can tinker, go back and change, say, no, you know, you did that dance a little too quickly. How much gets changed? And when you see it, how much input are you allowed to have?
I mean, a fair amount. There's different phases of it. You know, there's the long period of development before you're in rehearsal at all. And that's a process where it's very much just you and the composer, maybe the director, if there's one attached already, doing little workshops or readings, and the artistic director of the theater that's going to produce it. And so there's only a couple of you who have any input, you know, on what you felt about changes that need to be made. Then you get into rehearsal, the actors and the designers start to have their input. You get into previews and you can feel the audience response. So all along the way, you're making changes. On a play, if you're the playwright, you're sort of the only arbiter of the text. On a musical, it's a little bit more of a team effort. So you just try to have like a healthy process for everyone's different ideas in an egoless way, getting to compete so that the best idea wins, ideally.
Right.
Yeah.
And usually does. This is a story about an Egyptian police band that gets lost en route to an Israeli town.
Yeah.
What do you want people to walk away with when they leave the theater?
I hope that the thing we've managed to preserve from the film is, you know, the feeling I came away with the first time I watched it, which is that it's a story that we anticipate is going to be overtly political in a certain way. When you hear what it's about, as you just described it, an Egyptian police orchestra gets lost in Israel, they're stranded in some town, everyone's going to argue, there's going to be, and in fact, it instead becomes this just very simple human story about the locals taking in these musicians and the little connections that form and the realizations it brings out of everyone about their own lives. So what I hope people take away is this idea that when you sort of strip away man-made constructs like borders and, you know, rhetoric, political rhetoric, people's basic needs for food, for shelter, for love, for music are universal. You know,
Given the increasing vitriol in the Middle East, does anything change between the time the movie came out and the time the play?
In how the story's told?
Yeah.
You mean? I mean, the movie's set, and so is the musical in the early '90s, and so I think if something has changed, it's the lens through which people watch it. I think that now it feels a little bit more like a very sort of poignant and nostalgic look at a time when things
Wishful
seemed
thinking.
a little bit more hopeful than they do right now, and maybe a hope for another more hopeful time that might be coming, although it's not clear when or how. So I think our vantage has changed, even if the story hasn't really.
Itamar Moses, thanks for joining us. The play is The Band's Visit, playing at the Ethel Barrymore Theater. The Tony Awards handed out June 10th at the Radio City Music Hall. And my Times colleagues join me for the backstory next. What kind of week has it been? President Trump learned he couldn't block negative tweets. Barbara Underwood became the state's attorney general. Both parties take a step toward choosing their statewide tickets. Joining me to discuss these stories and more are my Times colleagues, contributing writers Clyde Haberman and Eleanor Randolph. If we have time, we'll discuss those statewide tickets, but I think there are even more important things. Eleanor, the MTA, $19 billion. Is that money going to come forward? From where? And who is going to exercise the leadership to try and get it?
Well, you know, I know that Cuomo doesn't like it, Governor Cuomo doesn't like anybody to say this, but he's really in charge here. This is his MTA, and he comes up with this this language from 30 or 40 years ago that says that the New York City has some obligation towards the MTA, but the truth of the matter is that it is an authority and the governor has the most control over it. Now, he's already saying that this $19 billion is too much money, but it looks to me as though what they're really trying to do is work at night and try to get just line by line fixed with new cars, new equipment, and the one thing that the MTA officials have said is that no matter where you are and where you're going, you're probably going to be inconvenienced over the next 2 years.
The governor, in effect, brought Andy Byford in. He came up with this figure. At some point, why doesn't he, the entire MTA board, get up and say, either give us the money or we quit?
That's a good idea.
Well,
I
that's
like
a good
that.
question, but you know, I won't fully let the city off the hook here. In the end, it is the mayor's constituents who ride the subway. So while these two guys continue to deflect responsibility, the ones who get hurt, of course, are those of us who ride the thing, unlike both of them.
It's not true, Clyde. It is the governor.
Yes, it is the governor's
who controls
responsibility.
it, and it's his responsibility.
But it is absurd, Eleanor, for the mayor to act as if, well, this is not my responsibility in any way, shape, or form.
Well,
it's his
can't-
constituents.
He can't control. The only thing he can do is give money
Yes,
to the MTA.
that's no small
And
concern.
he does give money, and he has been giving
Some.
money. But the actual control
Not
over the
enough.
system
Of
is
course,
the
I'm
governor's.
not disputing it, but this fighting between these two guys is beyond tiresome. It is corrosive, and this has been going on. And they act as if, you know, the rest of us aren't supposed to give a damn about this. All I'm saying is I'm not prepared to let the mayor off the hook on this because he keeps coming back with this millionaire's tax, which is a
Well, it's not
non-starter,
gonna work.
and it's a waste of time. And the city has surpluses. The city, you know, he has raised the budget his 5 years in office, not quite 5 years in office, by about 30%. That's extraordinary. So there is money that can be gone.
Some of that for pre-K,
devoted-
some of that for
yes,
homeless.
and a lot of other things too, and some of it noble, some of it maybe not so much. Nothing is more important than fixing the subways. I've said a zillion times here and in editorials. Subway system collapses, New York City dies. New York City dies, New York State dies, and that's indeed where the governor's
No
responsibility
question.
comes in.
We heard about Twitter and a victory for free speech, of
Right.
course, but some blows to free speech here in New York as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel very strongly about this. First, you have the NFL caving to President Trump on the kneeling business of the players. They have a right to free expression on this, and it'll be interesting to see what happens if now that they're required to stand during the national anthem instead of taking
Will
a
they
knee.
take the
Will they
fist?
do a power fist? This is going to blow up in their faces. This is a business decision. But on the other side,
Without consulting the union.
without consulting the unions. And on the other side of the coin, though, we had a lawyer with a racist rant at a fast food place last week. Went viral on the internet. And he's since apologized, but I'm not sure I take his apology as sincere. But we have a few state officials, a few government officials, not even state, Congressman Espaillat and Ruben Diaz Jr., the borough president of the Bronx, filing a grievance with the courts to clearly to sanction this guy. Now, wait a second. His speech was despicable. It was wrong-headed and all the rest of that. It doesn't say in the First Amendment that you have protected nice speech. You have protected
right.
speech.
Right.
And they're trying to use government instruments to silence that. That is unacceptable, and I wish that the Civil Liberties Union was out there on this one.
Where is the Civil Liberties Union?
Not on this one.
Eleanor, a quick assessment of the two official tickets statewide.
Well, of course, Andrew Cuomo has really sort of locked up the Democratic primary, even though it looks like Cynthia Nixon will probably, on September 13th, which is a Thursday, we should start saying that now, she will probably be running against Cuomo, but he got 95% of the party, and so he'll get that, and Mark Molinaro will be the Republican.
Okay, we'll talk about that a lot between now and September. Thanks to Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph, and I'll have some additional thoughts next. Here's a sobering thought as I contemplate my 50th college reunion. As the class of 1968 left town, graduates from 1918, when World War I was raging in Europe and Woodrow Wilson was futilely seeking to make the world safe for democracy, were arriving on campus for their 50th reunion. Just imagine how disconnected we felt from them and vice versa. Looking back, those presumably insurmountable divides ought to temper any of our impetuous judgments of the class of 2018 and theirs of us. In 1964, my college tuition was $1,800. A curfew for juniors was being abolished. A new anti-war group that called itself Students for a Democratic Society was applying for official recognition. The university was considering the purchase of a time-sharing, multiple-access computer system. Andrew Hacker taught me government. He later left for Queens College, where he still teaches. I once asked him how the students at Cornell and Queens differed. The students at Cornell may be smarter, he told me. The ones at Queens are hungrier. According to the actuarial tables that were available when we were born in the mid-1940s, most of us in the class of 1968 should have been dead by now. According to the latest longevity projections, though, if we survived this far, most of us will live to return for our 60th reunion. In the tumultuous 1960s, as John Gardner, the former Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary, reminded us in his commencement address, American society was caught in a savage crossfire between uncritical lovers and unloving critics. It still is. But despite those times, or maybe because of them, we graduated a long time ago with dreams and hopes. Gardner also cautioned us then that the era of the mid-20th century was to release aspirations without designing institutions responsive enough to satisfy those aspirations. A number of our aspirations may have been fulfilled since 1968. A few we might have wisely reevaluated or even abandoned. Some, still noble, must have survived somewhere. Commencement means a beginning. Looking ahead, a decade or more remains a long time to dust off those unsatisfied dreams and hopes and to still make a difference. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.